We'll start over. Um, Thank you and welcome to tonight's Kiwanis Let's Talk. I am very excited to have with us tonight Jason Barger. Here comes Fran. Jason Barger, I've known for a long time. We go back many years in the Kiwanis world. And Jason has written several books. I've actually read several of his books, but I want to invite him tonight he'll be with us this evening. So for those of you that it's your first time, we have usually do a Zoom webinar, but tonight Jason wants to try to do some group breakouts. So we went to a Zoom meeting, and since our numbers are typically lower in numbers, so we're going to be able to do that. It'll work great. We'll test it out and see what's going. But Jason is committed to engaging the minds and hearts of people, and if you've read any of his books and never spent any time with, you'll quickly find that out. He's a leadership, culture, and service visionary. He delivers over 70 speeches around the world annually and is truly a dynamic storyteller. His books have been celebrated by the New York Times and other global media, and his latest book, Thermostat Cultures, has been a hit worldwide. As the founder of Step Back Leadership Consulting LLC, he is a sought-after collaborative partner with teams and organizations to develop compelling leaders, cultures, and visions for the future. For 10 years, Jason led thousands of people to build 125 houses internationally for families living in poverty and developed a program to serve the homeless on the streets of Columbus, Ohio. In 2004, Jason received a Jefferson Award, a national award given to ordinary people doing extraordinary things. In 2014, Business First named him one of their 40 Under 40 award winners. He is passionate about engaging the minds and hearts of people in order to strengthen leadership, culture, and clarity of mission, vision, and values. He speaks around the world, and his company, Step Back Leadership Consulting partners with companies to make true impact on building the culture they desire. You can actually listen to him on a host of his podcast, The Thermostat with Jason Barger. Follow him on social media, Jason V. Barger, and learn more at his website. So we will make sure that information gets to you as we always do. Again, we are recording tonight's session. And the first book I read of Jason's was called Step Back from the
Baggage Claim.
So Step Back from the Baggage Claim. And as a person who traveled a lot, and I'm sure many of you who traveled, you'll understand that quickly. So Jason, welcome to Kiwanis Let's Talk. We are so glad to have you with us, and I will turn it over to you.
Awesome. Sue, it is wonderful to see you. It has been too long since we have physically been in the same space, but it's awesome to see you through the computer. And you know what? Every time I do one of these, which I've been doing many of these lately, I am also very grateful the fact that we can have people all around the world, and even in an environment that we're in right now, that we can be connecting with each other. So I'm excited to be with you for the short amount of time that I get to be with you. And as Sue said, I want this to be interactive. So I look forward to if there's questions you have in the chat box or things that you think are interesting, we'll leave some time at the end to make sure that we talk about it. And then as Sue said, we're also going to do some little breakout rooms so that we can talk about some of the things that I am sharing, or at least some of the topics for tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we're going to get rolling. All right, there we go. There's the logo that Sue presented me with. Sue, if that looks good. But here we go. Let's talk about some of the things that we're talking about tonight. I want to start out by first telling a story. And as Sue said, I'm lucky to get to do this kind of thing across the country and around the world, to not only write books, but speak and consult with teams and organizations around the world that are trying to engage the minds and hearts of their people, and to develop leaders, to develop culture and clarity around mission, vision, and values. And so there's an image that has been that has stuck with me since over the last year. And this was from pre-COVID, but pre-COVID, I have three weasels. I got three kids, and my youngest daughter is a fifth grader. And when it came time to volunteer for her field day, I went out to I volunteered, and they threw me to the tug-of-war station. And so we have all these elementary schools in Columbus, Ohio, that, all these elementary school kids that are out in the field, and every 15 minutes, a new class was running to the station, and they'd play tug-of-war. And it was my job to just let them play tug-of-war. Well, the same thing happened every single class of kids that would come over. After about 10 minutes of doing it, the kids would start to get bored with tug-of-war, and they'd look up at me, and I'd have 5 minutes to stall. And so I started to do something. I looked at them and I would say, who wants to do boys versus girls? And immediately they would freak out and they'd be like, this is the greatest thing ever. And the boys would start pumping their chests and flexing their muscles and talking about how they were, oh, we're so strong and we're going to. And meanwhile, maybe because I had a fifth grade girl, I would quietly walk over to the girls' side of the line, and the girls would actually look up and listen to you while the boys were over there beating their chests and flexing their muscles. And I'd look at the girls and I'd whisper to them, I'd say, hey, organize yourselves on the rope, like in a zipper fashion, get on one side of the rope all the way down, and then pick a captain. And when I start this tug of war, the captain yell out 1, 2, 3, and everybody pull. 1, 2, 3, pull. 1, 2, 3, pull. And of course, the girls looking up and they're all listening to me and they're like, you got it? I got it. I got it. And sure enough, I'd go back and I'd start up this tug of war, and the same thing would happen every single time. I'd start the tug of war, and the guys, because they were still over there flexing their muscles and pumping their chest, as soon as I'd start it, they'd come running in and they'd grab the rope, but they wouldn't be organized at all. And as soon as it would start, they'd be pulling it as hard as they can and gripping it and ripping it and pulling it. But they'd actually, because they weren't organized, they'd start to be pulling, and they'd actually be almost pulling against each other, because so there'd be friction on the rope. And sure enough, the girl side, the captain would yell out 1, 2, 3, everybody'd pull. 1, 2, 3, everybody pull. And next thing you know, the girls would win. The boys would freak out and they'd call for a do-over. We'd line it up and the same thing would happen. I watched this happen well over a year ago, pre-COVID. And as I was watching this, it was a perfect image for what is happening in many teams and organizations even before COVID. That so much was happening, so many things happening in the world. We're racing so quickly, everybody running in different directions. And in many teams and organizations, every single day in this busyness, this rush to run in, that many teams were running in and grabbing the metaphorical rope. And yet you've got different generations grabbing the rope. You've got different departments grabbing the rope. You've got different ways of thinking, and everybody thinks they've got a better way to pull the rope. And what ends up happening is we're almost pulling against each other. And yet we know this as humans, but we also know this throughout teams and organizations, is the very best in the world, no matter what it is you do, are the teams and the organizations and the leaders who actually take time to get organized on the rope. And in an environment when so much is happening around us, how we get aligned on the rope and get clear on how are we going to pull it, what our role is on the rope, and in what direction we're going to pull it, are the teams that end up being the most successful. That was pre-COVID. And then, of course, as we know, over the last year, then all this other stuff began swirling in the world. Not only a global pandemic, which people that are on this call from all over the world, you know that you've experienced the pandemic in some way and that it's all around us. In our country, we've also not only been in the midst of a global pandemic, but we've had economic uncertainty and political uncertainty and civil unrest and issues of social justice and racism. We've had, are our kids going to school or not going to school, or online or hybrid? And all of this stuff that has been swirling around us, that leaders and teams and organizations have had to realize that now more than ever do we need to get organized on the rope, ourselves individually, but then also with the people around us, in order to navigate our way through all of these things that are out of our control. What are the things that are within our control? And so I've been reminding all of us in teams and organizations that you don't solve a maze by rushing through, that it requires us to step back and to think about how are we engaging with one another, and how are we helping to align with each other and make sure that we're clear what is the mission that we're trying to accomplish, and how are we going to then intentionally enter ourselves into the maze. But in the times of uncertainty, it's easy for us to go down one of two paths in our mindset. That oftentimes when uncertainty comes up, it's easy for people in their mindset as a leader and across entire teams and organizations for the mindset to be based in fear and doubt and panic. And yet we also know the best teams and organizations and leaders in the world are the ones that they don't let their mind wander down that path, but they intentionally direct their path back to what is our strength? What is it that we can bring to this situation? What are the opportunities that are here, even in the midst of challenges? And how can we innovate? How, in the midst of even challenges and things that seem that are out of our control, what are the things that are within our control? And what role can we play in stimulating progress and finding a better way to move forward together? I was reminded, a friend of mine once climbed Mount Everest. In fact, he was on many explorations to climb Mount Everest. And this image has come back to my mind during this past year of so much that's happening in the world. But he talked about when you're hiking Mount Everest, you get up to a certain elevation on Everest. And when you get up certain elevation, the air gets very thin. And in fact, the air is so thin, the oxygen levels are so thin that it requires 4 breaths to even accomplish any task. And so he tells these stories of waking up at 3 a.m. in their tents on the side of Mount Everest. And they have to wake up so early because it takes so long to do anything. And so they lay there in their sleeping bags and they have to take 4 breaths. 4 breaths, sit up. 4 breaths to get enough oxygen in order to do any task. 4 breaths to sit up. 4 breaths to put on their shoe. 4 breaths to tie their shoe. 4 breaths to put on their other shoe. And so on and so on. That it required them 4 breaths before they could even take the next step. Over the last year that we've been experiencing and the reality that we're not through these challenges yet, this image has come to the surface again for me, that leaders of all kinds, leaders either by title or all of us that are trying to lead and navigate ourselves and others through the challenges that we're experiencing right now, that we need to remember that oftentimes it requires 4 breaths and then taking that next step. 4 breaths and then identifying what is the next step that we need to take. And right now, as I'm lucky to work with many different teams and organizations of all kinds across industry. Many times, we're froze up here for a second. Freeze on your end, Stu?
No, you're good.
You're good. I'm good? Okay.
Yep, we can see you. Yep.
Okay. Something looks like the slides just froze there for a second. Oh. Well, see if it kicks in here. Well, leaders right now, no matter where they are.
Jason, I had that problem. Do a right click and hit next.
Let's see. Yeah, it's freezing up on me. Apologize. I don't know why that's happening.
Hey, I think it's tonight.
Just hit a right click, do a right click, and then hit next.
There we go. Let's see if that worked. Okay. Yep. There we go. It's back. Look at that. So right now, I'm lucky to get to do this across teams and organizations of all different industries. And what I can tell you is that the organizations that are navigating their way through this mountain and through the environment that we're in right now are the ones that are realizing that we've got to breathe oxygen into ourselves, which is hopefully what something like this is, and that you've signed in for tonight is hopefully an opportunity for you to breathe oxygen into yourself a little bit so that you're able to identify what that next step is. And right now, the best leaders, teams, and organizations are the ones that are realizing, even in the midst of an environment where we've asked people to socially distance and work remotely and, stay away from each other, all for good reasons, of course. But it's in those moments where we're going to need to make sure that we're not only breathing oxygen into ourselves, but we're getting creative to how can we breathe oxygen into others, breathing oxygen into our teammates and helping others navigate their way along this path. And then along this path, one of the ways that we breathe oxygen into ourselves and into others is doing what we're going to do tonight, which is having conversations that are the currency for change. I love that phrase. I use that phrase with many of the teams and organizations I work with, is that conversations are the currency for change, which is a fancy way of saying if we want to identify what those solutions are, find the next step that we need to take, we've got to be willing together to come together and to have that conversation that becomes the currency for change. And right now, many teams and organizations are realizing that it's the difference between investing time and managing time. that too often we get stuck in this mode of managing time where we're just busy and we're spinning our wheels and we're just putting out fires and reactionary only doing the things that we're filling our days and filling our times with things, which is a different mindset than investing our time, which means we've got to get clear that as we get at a higher elevation on the mountain, as we get higher up and the oxygen gets thinner, we need to make sure that we're having the right conversation with the right people around the right priority, and to make sure that we don't waste our oxygen on things that take our breath or don't give our breath to other people. We need to make sure that we're investing our time in the right priorities, into having the right conversation, and make sure that the right people are involved in the discussion so that we can find solutions and stimulate progress. It was Plato that said, "What is honored will be cultivated." I love that. What is honored will be cultivated. And so there's an opportunity for all of us to be asking the question of what is it that we're truly going to honor even in the midst of these challenges? And along that journey, each step, what we honor is what will be cultivated along our path. And so we know this as leaders right now. All of us are needing and also having to breathe oxygen into ourselves and certainly into the people around us. And every time we have the right conversation around the right priority and the right people are involved at the right elevation, every time we do that, we are creating a culture. And we create a culture every single moment of every single day. Culture, which is a word that gets thrown around so much today because everybody knows and wants to have a great culture with the people around them. But oftentimes we don't stop to step back and define, what do we mean when we say this term culture? My latest book, as you heard Sue say, is called Thermostat Cultures. And culture, I'll explain what that means, this idea of thermostat cultures in just a minute. But let me just define that culture is dynamic, which means culture is changing moment by moment every single day. Culture is being created by the way we think, act, and interact in every single moment, every single day. So oftentimes when teams and organizations reach out to me and say, "Hey, Jason, we want help changing our culture," I look at them and I say, well, your culture is already changing. It's not a matter of is it changing, because it's changing. Culture's dynamic. It's changing moment by moment every single day. So it's not a matter of is it changing. The question is, and the important question is, what is it we want the culture to become? And are we going to be courageous enough together to begin to design, envision, and then commit to creating that culture? And right now in the world, no matter what your team, no matter what your organization is, no matter what your cause is, no matter what your community is, culture becomes your competitive advantage. And what I mean by that, in a world that there's so much out there that's swirling and so much negativity and so many choices that people have, not just what you do, but how you do it, and the culture that you create becomes your competitive advantage, the differentiator between you and another organization, you and another team, you and another community, you and another club. That culture of not just what you do and how you do it becomes something that, if your culture is authentic and compelling and real, culture becomes that competitive advantage that attracts more people to it. It retains more people, and more people want to be a part of it. And so the reason why it's called thermostat cultures is because if you know the difference between a thermometer and a thermostat, a thermometer, of course, as we all know, is purely reactionary, right? And thermometers, of course, are very important, and especially during a global pandemic, very important for us to be able to take our temperature. But thermometers are purely reactionary, which means all a thermometer does is react to the external conditions and then tell us what our temperature is. It just reads the temperature. And so if there's a giant thermometer on the wall and you start, if it was measuring the temperature in the room and you started filling it with people, it would just react to that and the temperature would go up because there are more and more people in the room. And then if everybody left the room, it would react and the temperature would go down. Well, too many individual leaders, but also entire teams and organizations, especially when so much is swirling in the world, too many people get stuck and too many teams get stuck in thermometer thinking. And what I mean by that is thermometer thinking. If we don't have clarity around the temperature that we're trying to set, of not just what we do, but how we do it, then the culture we end up creating of how we work together and how we move throughout the world becomes purely reactionary. And the culture that people end up experiencing just depends on how we're feeling today, what the mood is it raining outside, is it snowing, how am I feeling? And it's purely reactionary. And that in those kind of teams and organizations, the culture just goes up and down. And it really, what it ends up becoming is people experience a culture that's very scattered and inconsistent. It often leads to rush to judgments. And then also it creates this environment where oftentimes it's when something doesn't go well or doesn't go the way we planned, it's who's to blame, and it's always somebody else's fault. But in thermostat cultures, when you study the most influential leaders, teams, and organizations on the planet, they operate more in thermostat mode, which different than a thermometer, it means that their thinking is more like that thermostat, which means they intentionally have taken time and energy to be aligned individually and collectively around what is that temperature that we're trying to set. What is that temperature? Not just what we do, but how we work together, how we show up. What is that culture that we want people to feel when they collaborate and work with us? And when there's clarity around how I hope to show up as a leader and what is the temperature I'm trying to set as a team or as an organization, all of a sudden the culture is proactive, which means because we have clarity around the temperature we're trying to set, the culture isn't scattered and inconsistent. Instead, it's intentional and purposeful. Instead of rushing to judgments, we step back and we seek to understand the situation and how can we set a different temperature. And lastly, when something doesn't go our way, or none of us are perfect and no organization is perfect, when something doesn't go the way we planned, instead of showing up to the table, pointing fingers, who's to blame, and it's always someone else's fault, in thermostat cultures, the leaders and teams show up solutions focused and taking personal ownership. How can I and we together set a different temperature and take the next step to move us forward? And so you all know this, and certainly across Kiwanis International, clubs all over the world are thermostats. And so this is just a reminder that we are the thermostats, and our own internal temperature sets a temperature for the people around us of not just what we do, but how we show up to do what we do, that we all are setting a temperature for the people around us. And so what I'll remind you too, for any group of people on the planet, any relationship, any small team, any club, any organization, any school, any community, and yes, our world, I'll just tell you that there is no vaccine for that culture, for the culture that you're thinking about. Now, there is a vaccine for COVID. Get the vaccine. That's good. Get the vaccine. But in terms of creating your culture on your team, there is no magic vaccine. There's no magic pill we take or shot in the arm. Culture is co-created by all of us, and it requires all of us to show up every single day and get clear on what temperature are we trying to set and what is it that we want to do together in order to set it. And in the culture shaping world, and when I work with teams and organizations, I remind them of what we allow lingers, the habits of how we talk to each other, how we operate, how we work together or don't work together. Do we gossip? Do we blame? All of those things, what we allow lingers and becomes the culture, but what we teach triggers. What we teach triggers, which means the best leaders, teams, and organizations, once they're clear on that temperature they're trying to set, then they get really good and intentional about what is it we need to teach in order to trigger a positive chain reaction and intentionally teach the culture that we're trying to create. And so in my book, Thermostat Cultures, one of the things I talk about is most people don't sit around and study change theory, but I'm a strange guy who thinks about this kind of stuff. But if you study change theory, how do we as individuals or how do collective teams and organizations change? How do you go from wherever you are to whatever you want to be? It all follows the same pattern. And I refer to it as the 6 A's of leading change because a lot of the academic and philosophical things I think are hard for people to understand. And in these terms, it makes a whole lot more sense to me, but it all follows the same pattern. How do we as individuals, or how do we collectively set the culture and set the temperature? And in the book, I walk through these 6 A's. It all follows the same pattern. It starts with us. We got to be willing to step back and assess, where are we? What are we doing well? What are we not doing well? And we got to be honest about it. Then we've got to make sure that we're aligning with the people around us, making sure we're on the same page as to what our mission is, what's the purpose, why are we doing this, and are we willing to go on the journey together? Then we've got to aspire, which means we got to paint a vision for the future. What do we want to exist that doesn't exist yet? What are we trying to create together? And then we've got to be able to articulate it, which means we've got to be able to say to each other, what is that future we're trying to create? And what are the values that are going to drive us in order to create that? Because language helps drive behavior. So we've got to be able, if we can't describe it to one another, then we can't be surprised when it doesn't exist. And then we've got to make sure that from that articulating of where we're going and how we want to get there, then we got to tie it to action. What are we going to go do to intentionally create that future that we want? And then lastly, how are we going to anchor it? Which means, that's the fancy term in culture shaming. We're going to anchor it. That means that this isn't going to be a one-time thing. We're not going to just do this, remember that time we did that thing, but anchoring it is about making sure systematically throughout our relationships and our teams and organizations that the culture we're trying to create gets anchored in everything we do. So in organizations, it's how we hire. It's how we onboard. It's how we develop leaders, how we identify emerging leaders and coach them up and train them and develop them. It's how we do performance evaluations. It's, ongoing. And the reason why those arrows go like that is because setting the temperature and calibrating the thermostat and leading cultural change never, ever stops. We're always adjusting and setting that temperature and returning to assessing where are we and what's the next step along the journey. So I want us to have some conversations that are the currency for change tonight. And as Sue said, I want to make sure that we're having some kind of breakout room discussions here. And so in just a second, I'm going to invite Sue to put us in the breakout rooms. And so anybody, before we go there, if you want to take a screenshot of these questions, just so you have them in front of you, that might be helpful. But I want you to talk about, just for a few minutes, we're going to give you just about, we'll say 10 minutes. Just so we've got a little bit of time. We'll give you 10 minutes in your breakout rooms to talk about what temperature do you want to set in the year ahead? What is that temperature? And what are the actions and responses that on your team or your culture, whatever you're thinking about, whether that's your family, your community, your club, your business, whatever that may be, what are the actions or responses that we need more of in the year ahead?
So Jason,
Sue's going to break this into group.
What's the word I want to say here? We're still seeing Mount Everest. The slides didn't change.
The slides didn't change?
No.
Oh, no. Okay. Mine were changing on my end. That's weird. Let me stop sharing. You there?
Yep, I'm here.
All right. Well, let me try to put it. Let me try to share it, reshare it. So you didn't see any of those slides?
No.
Oh.
I was like, "There's nothing." It's okay.
Can you see it now?
Now yeah. Now there's your circle. Okay.
Okay. Well, if you were listening, then here was what we talked about. There we go.
There's your
This will be a quick
oxygen.
recap. Breathing oxygen. We talked about conversations of the currency for change. We talked about the difference between investing time and managing time, and making sure the right conversation, the right priority, the right people at the right elevation. We talked about culture being the competitive advantage, the difference between the thermometer, which is purely reactionary, and the thermostat, which is proactive in nature, and the difference between that kind of scattered and inconsistent versus intentional and purposeful. And that we are all the thermostats, that our internal temperature leads to the external temperature that people experience around us. And that there's no vaccine for our culture. Even though we want the magic pill and the quick shot in the arm, and what we allow lingers, but what we intentionally teach triggers positive momentum. and positive chain reaction. And then there's the 6 A's that I referenced, the 6 A's of leading change. Again, this is just consistent with change theory. If you've ever studied that, how do we as individuals, or how do teams and organizations collectively change? It all follows the same pattern. So now, hopefully you can see all those, and I don't know why those were changing on my end. So the wonderful internet stopped it. But here, can you see that question now, Sue?
Yes. What temperatures do we want to set in 2021, and what actions or responses do we need more of? And while you were chatting, I did type the A's, the 6 A's in the chat, so they are in there for them as
awesome.
well. So we.
So why don't we do a 10-minute breakout, and then
All right.
on your end, Sue, you'll be able to give them a 1-minute warning when we're going to bring, and now we'll bring everybody back, and then we'll kind of wrap it up from there.
All right, so I'm creating the room. You will all be assigned a room. You need to accept it when it says go. And we are opening all the rooms.
Sorry, Sue, I had to step away,
That's
so
okay. You can go ahead and, if you want to jump in your room, there's about 4 minutes left.
I'll hang out here. That's fine.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, we must have had a number of people that had trouble because Fran wound up leaving. She must be having challenges with her machine, and there's a lot of people that have sent notes and said, I can't get in. So
Yeah, it's just one of those times. Yeah, I
yeah,
didn't get the reminder either, so I just went in and re-registered.
right. So I
And
don't,
Sue, when I got the re-registration, when I got the new information, it didn't actually have the link to the Zoom until I put it into my calendar.
oh, that's
Then
weird.
the Zoom link showed up. So that may be something helpful to you to know.
Right. I will have to figure out what happened.
Yeah.
But I got a couple of emails from people in the Texas area. They're like, we can't even get their tech. They sent me text messages like, the weather's so bad we can't get connections. And I'm like, that's right. They were getting storms.
That's too bad.
So we'll
I'm going to look and see if I still have the email from the confirmation
yeah.
and forward that to you so you can see
Perfect.
what I'm
Okay.
talking about. If I have it.
Yeah. Well, I know even my mom had trouble getting in tonight.
Yeah, I just sent it to you, Sue.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Well, and if Jason he was advancing slides and nothing was happening.
I know. I tried to send him a private message, but he didn't see
Yeah,
it.
I did too. And I wasn't seeing things and I was trying to watch the other stuff and I thought that's really weird, but
How's your mom?
she's good. Thanks. She is good. Okay, let's see what it shows. Yeah, that's really weird.
Yeah,
Well,
once I set it to go into my calendar, the Zoom link was there, but it
okay.
was in the confirmation.
Okay.
So it may be helpful to know that.
Yeah, I'll do some digging and figure out what happened. Because like I said, I got a couple of people that sent me a note. They said that they didn't have internet, so
Didn't even realize I had my video turned off too. So I'm sitting here talking to you from the abyss.
oh yeah.
Apologies.
I'm watching the breakout room just time wise, so
Yeah.
so Donna, Jerry, and Roger got Jason in their room, so they ought to have quite a good time. I was moving furniture before we started. They're refinishing my floors next week while I'm gone, and I had to move all the furniture out of the living room. I'm like, I didn't think I had that much furniture in there. Well, it's the living room and dining room, so by the time you move out the chair and the tables and my desk, my roll top desk that's there and the desk chair and
Did you have some help?
oh no. Asked my nephew to come over, but of course that didn't go anywhere. So I'll send him another note. Say, hey, can you come on over and move my couch? Bring your buddies.
I don't suppose it would be appropriate to have Sparty come over and move everything for you.
No, no. He had to work today. He was a busy guy.
Oh,
We took him over to the pavilion today.
yeah.
To visit with everybody that was getting their shot. So Okay, it feels like it's been 8:49 for like 5 minutes.
Yeah.
All right, so close the room. It gives them all 60 seconds. Well, even Jason had trouble getting in tonight. And he had all the main stuff too, so I think we just had a...
Where is he located, Sue?
He's actually in Ohio.
Okay.
Yeah. But I met him a long time ago. We were doing key leader stuff.
Here they come.
So Jason, it sounds like we had a lot of people that had challenges tonight
Oh yeah.
with our stuff. Because some of our people that usually sign in from Texas are like, we don't have internet because they're getting storms.
Oh wow. Okay.
They're getting ready to have a huge. They're expecting like 6 to 8 inches of snow.
What?
Oh wow.
Yeah.
No, we don't want to talk
Where
about
is
snow.
that at?
Well, what
Dallas
else?
and all those areas.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh wow.
Oh,
Well, what I'll say is we had a lovely conversation in the breakout room I was a part of. So anybody who wasn't able to get on the call tonight or was having internet trouble or storms or whatever, I'm sorry they missed out, because we had a great conversation with people from British Columbia, Detroit, state of Washington. We were all over the map. So it was fun to be with them. So let me offer just some final thoughts, and then I want to leave a couple of minutes that if there are any questions in the chat box that are coming in, Sue, that I want to make sure I know we get to those. So some quick final thoughts on my end, and then we'll open it for questions or final thoughts from your end. I'll remind you of this. I love this story and this imagery. I learned how to surf not too long ago, about a year or so ago. And when my family and I were in Mexico and we were learning how to surf, and the guide that was teaching us, he had us laying on our bellies on the beach, and the surfboards, and the first thing he was showing us is how you jump up on the surfboard. And so we get down on our bellies and then up on and we were right on the beach, but then stand up on the surfboard and then back on our bellies and back up. And finally, after about 5 minutes of doing that, he looked at us and he said, okay, if you want to know how to surf, you got to know one thing. And we looked at him and said, okay, well, what's the one thing? And he said, where you look is where you go. Where you look, your body will follow. And he said, in a couple minutes, we're going to start going out there in the waves. And I can promise you that when you pop up on the surfboard for real, what gets your eyes and your focus and your attention is where your body will follow. And so if you pop up on that surfboard and where you start looking, it is all the waves that are crashing around you trying to steal your attention, or the other surfers, or looking down in the water wondering when Jaws is going to get you. He said, I promise you that where you look is where you go. And the moment you actually start surfing for real, it will, because you train your eyes right now before you even get out into the water, that as soon as you pop up on that surfboard, you put your eyes right on the shoreline. Because where we look is where we go. Where we look, our bodies will follow. I've been thinking about that ever since, and in a time when there's so much swirling around us, so many distractions in the world, so many things that to steal our attention and our focus, that it's never been more important for us as individuals, but also for entire teams and organizations, to make sure that we stay focused on what needs our eyes, our focus, and our hearts today. Because where we look is where we go. Where we look, our bodies will follow. And so if where we follow is into to blame and gossip and this will never work and negativity, and that's where we'll go. But if where we look and where we give our eyes and our focus and our attention, our heart to, is how can we be of service? What are we trying to accomplish? What are the solutions? And how can we set a temperature for the people around us? That's where we'll go. And lastly, I'll just tell you this quick story. I was at Southwest Airlines headquarters in Dallas one time, and the day we were there, we were talking about Southwest Airlines, of course, gets celebrated for having this amazing culture, and everybody writes books and talks about how great Southwest Airlines is. Well, there was one poster that was everywhere, And in big words around their headquarters, it said, count on me to own it. Count on me to own it. And then underneath it said, we are all ambassadors of our culture. And the reason why is because the first day when they're about to hire you at Southwest Airlines, whatever the job description is for whatever role it is you're going to take, they push it aside and they say, yeah, we'll get to that eventually. But to be honest, it's not what's most important. We can find somebody to do these tasks. There's plenty of talented people who can do this. What we want to talk to you about is this. And they lay in front of them a one page that describes the future culture they're trying to create together. Not the one that they got celebrated for yesterday, the one that they still yet to create together. And then with real clear language that helps drive the behavior, core values that are linked to action and behavior. This is what we think. If we can live these values every single day, that we're going to create that culture into the future. But if you want to work here, we got to be able to count on you to own it, because we are all ambassadors of our culture. I remind you, and I share this one last time with you, that we are all ambassadors for the culture that we want to create, whatever that is for you, the culture of your family, the culture of your community, the culture of your team, the culture of your club, the culture of your entire company and organization, or the culture of the world. We are all ambassadors of the culture, but it depends on what temperature do we want to set. It's been an honor to be with you all. If as Sue said earlier, those are all the ways that you can be in touch with me if that's authentic for you. If you're into podcasts, if you check out the Thermostat podcast on whatever platform you listen to, if you like this kind of stuff, there's every Tuesday a new podcast comes out. If you're into social media, at Jason V. Barger, or you can check out jasonvbarger.com or thermostatcultureslive.com for any other information. It's been an honor to be with you all. Sue, if there's questions or any time that you want, here we are.
Thank you, Jason. There are some questions. If you want to go ahead and drop your screen share, then we'll get to see everybody that's with us still tonight.
There we go.
That way people will get to
There we go.
connect with us all. Perfect. So there's a comment in here about the surfer wisdom, right? Surfer wisdom rocks.
Yeah.
You know, when you think about that, where you look is where you go. And I was, okay, so I'm a person that takes a lot of notes, and my group knows that. So I've got notes all over the place. You know, I go back to are you investing time versus managing time? I think of those things that we talk about, you know, and what temperature do you want to set? So Roger asks us a question. It says, can you give us some ideas on how we can change negativity in our team members?
Yeah, so I that's a great question, because negativity is all around us, and you know, especially in the world today, that there's a lot of division, there's a lot of disconnection, there's a lot of anger and negativity. And so what I've found with working with many teams and organizations lately is, one of the things, again, it starts with a conversation. That's the currency for change, Roger. I think the most effective teams that I've worked with, where negativity has been an issue and we've begun to then change the temperature and change the culture there, it started with us having the simple conversation around, you know, let's name and assess that it feels like we are being too negative. It feels like our language and the way that our mindset and the way that we're approaching things, and what is the culture that we want, and beginning to shift it into, are we even aware we're doing it? What does it look like? And what is it that we want more of and less of? And then as the conversation continues to evolve, we begin to then negotiate together as a team. Are we bought in, and what is it that we're willing to do, and how are we willing to hold each other accountable in the best sense, in the most positive sense? I'm accountable to you and you're accountable to me. And let's try ourselves, every time we catch ourselves going down that negative path, let's together name it and then choose to set a different temperature. That's a quick way that, but it doesn't mean it's easy, but those are some of the first conversations I would have.
So if anybody else has any questions or would like to talk about anything, you're welcome to open up your, turn off your mute. Being in a meeting like this, it gives us that opportunity to have some direct conversation without having to go through the chat. So Jason is here with us, but if you've got a question or a comment, I'm interested to know how your room was, Jason. You had people from all over.
Yeah, it was great. We had it was fun to just connect and hear what they were sharing, what resonated with them. I was with Roger and Jerry and Donna, and we were listening to them and hear what resonated with them. And then we started to get to the question of, well, what is that temperature, and then what are the actions and responses we need? And Jerry ended with saying, I think we really need to walk the 6 A's, and we need to remember that and realize that it's a process that maybe that will help us develop what the plan might be.
Hey, Jason, one of the things that I think is pretty powerful, and you did it well, is the storytelling. And so for those of us, and we know it's important, but what are some things that we can all do to make ourselves better storytellers?
Yeah, that's a great question, Greg. I appreciate that. Yeah, I agree with you. I think we live in a storytelling culture. And so one is, I think you have to get clear on, well, what is the story that you want to tell? Meaning, what is the message? What is a story that you want to be about? And then from that, let the purpose and the message of the story then drive, well, what is the anecdote, or what is the illustration or the example that backs that up? And what is, and oftentimes I find, like the surfing story, for example, that's resonated with, I found that really resonated with me. And so I figured if it resonated with me, maybe there are other weirdo, dumb people out there that it would also resonate with. So I got to be then willing to say, what is it about that image and the message of the image that resonated with me? And then begin to think, well, how would I craft that? And is that helpful? But naming what the message is first, and then layering in. For me, that's a story about distractions, and yet being focused on what is most important to us and what the mission and purpose is. And oh, by the way, it happens to be told through surfing.
Yeah, it sounds like it's almost like the punchline of the joke, and then you got to build the story, the joke, to get to the punchline.
Yeah. I think stand-up comedians would that would resonate with them, that the punchline, and then how do I get to there?
That was something I was just going to say, Greg, is that I think every one of us probably have experiences like Jason talked about with his surfing, that if we knew the punchline that we wanted out of that experience, we have that story to tell, and we can go do it.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It's just identifying and looking at it a different way, right? You're looking at, okay, I'm jumping up and down, off the sand, but until you really think, you're thinking, okay, I'm just really trying to figure out how I'm going to go surfing. And I think Dick mentioned earlier, it's the same with skiing, right? You've got to know what you're doing, but I think you have to sometimes take yourselves out of that context and say, okay, how do I look at this in the bigger picture? There are distractions. Do I know where I'm going?
That's right.
Yeah,
Sue. Sue, you mentioned it earlier, but this is again, I believe we're drawn to stories. And I think we're in a storytelling culture, of course, as it sounds like you all agree with that. But like, we're drawn to stories. And that's why, you even referenced how we met each other, and that the first book was Step Back from the Baggage Claim. Well, the same thing, Step Back from the Baggage Claim is about it. The message is about the frenzied life of running from point A to point B and trying to claim only that's ours. And yet it's told through that image of a baggage claim that maybe it's not about pushing other people or, out of the way to grab my bag. It's about stepping back and having perspective. And so the image of the baggage claim helps to tell the story of what it means. My second book is called Remember. And there's I can't reach it right now, but there's a post-it note on the cover of the book. And the reason why is because it's telling the story, and the book is all about, in the midst of these distracted world we're in, what are the things we need to remember each day? And then how do we remember? What does it mean to re-up my membership into the things that are most important to me and the things I want to give my energy to? And then Thermostat Cultures is about culture shaping and proactively doing it told through the story of a thermostat. And so that the story gets told through the image.
And, and I will tell you, every time, I did a lot of flying for several years. Every time I would go to well, no matter where I was in the world, a baggage claim, I thought of you, Jason, going, okay, how would Jason look at this? Because no matter where you're at, whether you're in the United States or, Australia or Japan or wherever, you watch everybody rush to the baggage claim. And
Yeah.
I used to sit back, because I'm like, okay, my luggage is going to get out. What's the big hurry, right?
Yep.
But I used to sit back and think about, okay, what would Jason say? And I will tell you, that's how I looked at things when I traveled, and you stop to think about. So it did resonate with me for a long time.
Jason, I
That's
think
wonderful. Thanks for sharing.
Jason, what you did is you put something together for me. So thank you. Whenever I've always had the philosophy, whenever something's going bad for me, I say that'll make a great story a year from now. But what I haven't done is I've said, well, what did I get out of this? What did I learn so that I can use that great story a year from now to tie it into something. And I haven't done that.
Wow, that's a great way of thinking about it.
Yeah, because we think about things. I joke when my mom went with me to Italy the one trip. She actually fell and broke her femur. Right. Well, we all joked about the ambulance, the orange ambulance that she was in. Right, and we all joked about the story afterwards. And now, of course, it's still a family joke, right? That mom went all the way to Rome to break her leg. But we talked. My brothers and I talked about, okay, what really came out of that. And how did that, what was the impact? You just start thinking about things, you just look at things in a different way. And like I said, I got all these notes here and I'm like, okay, the 6 A's of leading this: assess, align, aspire, articulate, action, and anchor. I'm one of those people that needs that same way.
Yep.
That needs something there.
No, that's great, and that's the way that Thermostat Cultures is
Right.
structured around those 6 A's, and the purpose of that again is because we can't skip one of the steps,
right?
And we've got to be asking ourselves intentional questions and having those conversations that are the currency for change all at each of the levels, each of the steps. So I'm glad that resonated with you.
Yeah, and the currency for change. I mean, you think about those things, you're like, yes, that's exactly what it is. There's a group of us, and there's a number of us here that are taking a program on equity excellence, and what it means in today's microaggressions and macroaggressions and all that stuff. And I think about the same thing. What is our culture of change?
Yeah.
What is that
Yeah.
currency? All right. So it's about 10 after 9. I know we can always keep this going, right? But great information. Any other thoughts from anyone today? I think everybody's minds are going, right? Woo!
Oh, it was a great program. Thank you. I learned a lot. I've got lots of new things to put into action.
Yeah, I think it's that motivation, right? Who was just somebody was chatting. Yeah.
Hey, you might want to mention again that the code you got like a couple weeks ago is where I went back to get on for tonight.
Right.
So for some reason, if the email doesn't go through, if we've been on once, we have the information to get on
the
again.
information, yeah. And I Linda actually forwarded me her code, her email, so I got to go back and figure out what happened with Zoom, whether it's because we transitioned it. And I think we're going to keep these as a meeting, so that may help. But I'll also figure out why, it didn't work the way it was supposed to tonight. So we'll figure that out. And maybe Jason will allow us someday to bring him back when we can figure out all that stuff and share some more of his message with us.
Of course. Well, great to be with you all tonight. I promised my children I would come see them before we're ending the evening here. So
you need to do that.
Great to be with you all, and thank you for inviting me in, Sue. Good to be with you all.
Thank you, Jason. I'll be in touch.
Thank you.
All right.
Could you give your
Jason.
website one more time?
I will. Yep, I'll put it in the chat for you.